The last thing Zoe Mensah expected to find at her late father's estate auction was a man bidding against her for a cracked wooden music box that played 2 seconds of a broken lullaby and nothing else. He was calm in a way that felt practiced. Expensive watch, jaw set like concrete, surrounded by 3 assistants who moved when he moved and stopped when he stopped, like planets orbiting something heavier than them. The kind of man who didn't attend auctions in person. He sent people for that. But he was here. For this. For a water-stained, termite-chewed, $20 music box that nobody else in the room cared about. Zoe raised her paddle. He raised his. She went higher. He went higher. Without even blinking. Without looking at her. Without looking at anything. Really. Except that box sitting on the auction table like it held the answer to something he'd been asking for a very long time. When the bidding hit $4,000, for a box worth less than a bus fare, the auctioneer's voice went thin and confused, and the whole room turned to stare. Zoe turned, too, and the man finally looked at her. The breath left her body like something physical had hit her. Not because he was handsome, though he was, in that severe and exhausted way of men who'd been carrying weight for too long. Not because of the money or the power that radiated off him like body heat, but because of his hands. His left hand, raised with the bidding paddle, had a scar along the knuckle. A specific scar. A thin white line in the shape of a crescent moon that she had last seen when she was 7 years old, pressing a bandage to a stranger boy's bleeding hand while her grandmother stood in the kitchen doorway pretending she hadn't noticed them. Zoe's paddle dropped. Her voice came out wrong, too small for the size of what was happening inside her chest. Young man? The man went completely still, and in the silence that swallowed the entire auction hall, something moved across his face. Something that cracked through all that expensive composure like water through rock, slow and inevitable and ancient. He had spent 18 years becoming someone who felt nothing. He felt everything. Welcome to Afro-Korean Stories, besties. Before we go any further, please subscribe if you haven't already. These stories deserve to be heard. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because this ending only makes sense if you understand how it started. Zoe Mensah was 7 years old when she understood 2 things about the world. The first thing, her father collected beautiful broken things. Clocks that didn't tick, paintings with slashes through them, music boxes with missing teeth in the comb that played stuttering half-songs. He ran a small repair shop in a corner of Accra that smelled of machine oil and sawdust and ambition. And people brought him the things they'd given up on, and he brought them back. Papa can fix anything, Zoe used to tell anyone who'd listen, with the absolute certainty of a child who has no reason yet to doubt. The second thing, her grandmother Mame Amma had a gift for seeing the invisible. Not in a spiritual way, though Mame Amma would have argued that point. In a practical way. She saw the neighbor boy who came to school with the same sandwich 3 weeks in a row because his parents had stopped coming home regularly. She saw the woman at the market who always bought slightly less than last week. She saw the children who laughed too loudly at nothing, which she said was always the sound of someone trying to drown out something they couldn't say. The world is full of people trying to disappear, Mame Amma told Zoe once, braiding her hair on a Sunday afternoon. Our job is to make sure they know they haven't managed it yet. You understand? Zoe had nodded, more interested at the time in the pattern being woven into her hair than in the philosophy being woven into her mind. She wouldn't understand for another few weeks. Not until the night she found the boy behind the compound wall. It was raining. The kind of rain that Accra did in October, not romantic or cinematic, just heavy and serious and without apology, filling the gutters and flattening the red dirt into dark mud. Zoe had snuck out to the back of their compound to retrieve the small notebook she'd left under the guava tree, the one she drew pictures in, the one with the green cover that she would have cried for a week to lose. The boy was crouched against the outside of the wall, not standing, crouching, like he'd folded himself into the smallest possible shape, like he was trying to take up less space than the rain. He was maybe 10 or 11, though his size made it hard to tell, slight in the way of someone who'd been rationing themselves for a long time. His clothes were soaked through to the skin. He had one sandal, just one, his feet in the dirt. He was shaking, not from cold, though the rain was cold. From something else. Zoe stared at him through the gap in the gate. He hadn't noticed her yet. He was staring at the ground with the fixed, unfocused look of someone whose mind had gone somewhere the body couldn't follow, somewhere safer, somewhere that didn't have rain or cold, or whatever had put him on the wrong side of a wall at this hour. She should have called May Mama. That would have been the sensible thing. Instead, she pushed the gate open. He scrambled back instantly, the fear so fast and instinctive it made Zoe's chest hurt. His hands came up in front of his face, a gesture so automatic it clearly wasn't the first time it had been necessary, and she saw the cut across his left knuckle. Fresh. Still oozing a little despite the rain washing it clean. Wait, Zoe said. She didn't know why she said it. He hadn't been going anywhere fast. His back was against the wall. He looked at her, dark eyes and a thin face. Korean, she thought, though she'd only ever seen Korean people in the dramas her aunt watched on weekends. And those people looked nothing like this. Those people had nice clothes and big houses and problems that resolved in 60 episodes. This boy looked like his problems did not resolve. Who did that? Zoe pointed at his hand. The boy looked down at the cut like he'd forgotten it was there. He said nothing. Does it hurt? Still nothing. But his jaw moved slightly. Not answering. Just processing the fact that someone had asked. Zoe made a decision. She held up one finger, wait, and disappeared back inside. She came back 3 minutes later with a clean cloth, the bottle of antiseptic her father kept on the kitchen shelf for workshop injuries, and 2 chin-chin biscuits from the jar on the counter. She pushed back through the gate, sat down in the mud next to him without any fanfare, and held out the cloth. He stared at it. Your hand, she said. The cut. You need to clean it or it gets infected. My papa says so. The boy looked at her for a long time, like he was running a calculation, like kindness was something he had to evaluate for hidden costs before he accepted it. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. Zoe cleaned the cut with the focused seriousness of a 7-year-old who had watched her father fix things all her life and had absorbed the principle. You treat every broken thing like it matters, or you don't treat it at all. She pressed the cloth down. He didn't flinch, though she knew it stung because the antiseptic always stung. What's your name? Silence. I'm Zoe. Zoe Mensa. My papa has a shop on the main road. The repair shop. More silence. But different silence. The kind that was listening. You don't have to tell me, she said, more to fill the space than anything. My grandma says names are for when people are ready to give them. Before that, people are just people. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not quite. More like the slight relaxation of something that had been held very tight for a very long time. Young men, he said. His voice was low and careful, like he was handing her something fragile. Young men, she repeated. It felt serious in her mouth, like it meant something. Is that Korean? He nodded once. How long have you been out here? He looked down the road, away from her, calculating something. 3 days, he said finally, in English that was precise and deliberate and accented with something that wasn't Ghanaian and wasn't American, something in between, shaped by wherever he'd come from and wherever he'd been trying to go. 3 days. In October rain. With one sandal. Zoe held out the chin-chin. He looked at it. Looked at her. Took it. Ate it in 2 bites in a way that told her the biscuit was not the first thing he'd done in 3 days either. She gave him the second one. He didn't pretend he wasn't going to take it. Where are your parents? The silence that followed was its own answer. The kind of silence with weight and history and a specific kind of grief that children shouldn't have to carry, but sometimes do anyway. Not because the world forgot about them, but because the world moved on without checking whether they were still aboard. Okay, Zoe said simply. She didn't push. She'd seen her grandmother's face do this same thing, this careful stillness, when a question had a hard answer. Are you hungry? Actually hungry, not biscuit hungry. Real food. Young men looked at the gate behind her. The warm light from the compound kitchen spilling through. The smell of her grandmother's groundnut soup, which had been on the stove since morning and was at the point now where it had crossed from food into something closer to medicine. He was hungry. She could see it in every line of him. Come in, she said. My grandma won't mind. He didn't move. She feeds everyone, Zoe said, which was true. May Mama had a philosophy about food and fellowship that was essentially, There is always more. And if there isn't, we make more. And if we can't make more, we divide what we have, and no one starves while I am standing. She'll be happy. She likes having people to feed. Young Min stood up slowly, like his joints were older than his age. He followed her through the gate. Mame Amma was standing at the stove when they came in, and she didn't turn around immediately. And when she did, she looked at the boy standing in her kitchen, dripping rain on the tile floor, one sandal, knuckle wrapped in a slightly uneven cloth bandage that had clearly been applied by a 7-year-old, and her face did something complicated and then settled into simple. "Sit down," she said, pointing at the table like he had always been expected. "Soup is ready." That was all. No questions in front of him. No looks at Zoe that translated to explain this child. Just, "Sit down, soup is ready, you are welcome here." Young Min sat. He ate. He finished the bowl and looked at it, and Mame Amma put more in without asking, and he ate that, too. Zoe watched him and thought, he's eating like he's storing it. Like he's building something against future cold. Like each spoonful is also the memory of the spoonful, something he can hold on to when there's nothing. She thought of her father's music boxes. The ones that were broken but still beautiful. The ones that played 2 notes instead of 12 and still managed to mean something. She thought, Young Min is like that. Mame Amma was 63 years old that year, and she had lived long enough to know that there were some questions you asked directly and some questions you circled around with patience until they answered themselves. She circled. Over the next 4 days, Young Min came to the compound at dusk. Not invited exactly, not every day exactly, but arriving with the regularity of someone who had a place now, or was learning to believe that he did. Mame Amma fed him. Zoe talked at him. The relentless, sociable chatter of a 7-year-old who found silence uncomfortable and found this particular person's silence a specific kind of challenge she was determined to resolve. Her father, Kofi Mensa, noticed the boy on the second day and said nothing to him directly, but asked Mame Amma about him in the kitchen after dinner. "Who is he?" "A child who needs feeding," Mame Amma said, which was both an answer and a boundary. Kofi was a practical man. He ran a repair shop. He understood that sometimes things needed attention before they needed explanation. "Is he safe?" "He is afraid," Mame Amma said. "Which is different." Kofi was quiet for a moment. "Where is he sleeping?" "I don't know yet. I'm finding out carefully." Kofi nodded and went back to the music box he'd been working on all week, the one with the broken comb, and said nothing more. This was the thing about Kofi Mensa. He was the kind of man who built space for things that needed space. He didn't rush understanding. He gave it room. On the 4th night, while Zoe was helping with dishes and Young Min was sitting on the back step watching the compound's mango tree in the dark, Mame Amma sat next to him with 2 cups of sabalo and the quiet of someone who had nowhere better to be. They sat for a while without speaking. Then she said, in Chui first and then in English when she wasn't sure he'd understood, "You don't have to tell me anything. But whatever is chasing you, you can rest here while you figure out what to do next." Young Min turned the cup of sabalo in his hands. His knuckles, both hands now, she could see more clearly in the compound light, had older scars than just the new cut. The kind of scars that came from surfaces harder than skin. "My father brought me here," he said finally. His voice was careful, like he was translating not just language, but feeling. 2 years ago, he had a business contact. He said we were coming for 3 months. Then the contact, his jaw tightened, the contact, and my father had a problem. My father went back to Busan. He said he would send for me in 1 week. And he didn't. He sent money for a while. Then the money stopped. Then the contact's family. He paused. They didn't want to keep me anymore. They said it was not their problem. Mame Amma breathed slowly. "How old are you?" 11. 11 years old. Alone in a country not his own. With a father who had meant to come back and then perhaps found it easier not to. With no documentation, no connections, no safety net. In a city that moved fast and noticed slowly. "Where have you been sleeping?" He listed the places without drama. The way you listed facts when the feelings attached to them had become too heavy to carry and you'd learned to separate them for survival. The workshop of a man who'd let him stay in exchange for work. The storeroom of a Lebanese grocery when the owner wasn't looking. The doorway of a closed church on the corner. The 3 days against the compound wall. May Mama looked at her sabalo, looked at the mango tree, looked at the compound gate that her granddaughter had opened without permission and without hesitation because she was 7 years old and had been watching her grandmother see invisible people her whole life and had learned, without being told explicitly, that seeing them was the first step and the most important one. You'll sleep in the storeroom tonight, May Mama said. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. Youngmin looked at her. You don't know me. I know what I need to know, she said. You sat in the rain for 3 days before accepting a biscuit from a 7-year-old. That tells me something. What does it tell you? That you're careful, she said. Careful people don't cause problems. They're just trying not to have any. She stood, collected the cups. Come inside before the mosquitoes make a meal of you. You've already fed everyone else recently. It's time someone looked after you for a change. Young men followed her inside. Zoe, watching from the kitchen window, felt something settle in her chest. The particular satisfaction of a thing going right. Like her father's face when a clock started ticking again, not because the ticking was spectacular, but because silence that should have sound was finally filled. Kofi Mensah was not a man who made grand gestures. He made steady ones. He came to decisions slowly, carefully, the way he approached a broken mechanism, studying it, understanding it, refusing to force it until he knew what it needed. He studied young men for 2 weeks before he spoke to him directly. Not coldly, more the way you study something you're responsible for, wanting to understand the full shape of it before you start. On a Thursday morning, when Zoe was at school and Mame Alma was at the market and Young Min was in the workshop courtyard doing the sweeping he'd started doing each morning without being asked, Kofi came out with 2 Fonda bottles and sat on the workshop step. Come sit, he said. Young Min sat, careful as always, on the edge of the step. Not relaxed, not closed, somewhere in between. Kofi handed him a Fanta. You know how to fix things? Young Min looked at the workshop door. A little. My father, a small pause, had a shop. Bicycles, motorcycles. I helped sometimes. You want to learn more? The question landed differently than Young Min had expected. Not can you work for me? Not I need help. You want to learn more. Like the learning was the offer, not the labor. Yes, he said. Okay. Kofi took a sip of Fanta. In exchange, you help me in the shop. Cleaning, carrying, small things to start. As you learn, more things. I'll pay you small. Not much, I don't have much. But enough. He paused. You'll stay in the storeroom until we sort out something better. My mother-in-law has already decided you're eating here. I've accepted that I have no say in the matter. There was the faint trace of a dry smile at the corner of his mouth when he said it. Young Min caught it. Something almost cracked in Young Min's face. Not quite a smile, but the memory of one. The ghost of what a face did when someone who cared about it said something that was quietly funny. Why? Young Min asked. The same question he'd asked Zoe at the fence. He had a habit of asking it. Like he genuinely couldn't calculate the answer, and it disturbed him. Kofi looked at him steadily. Because you're a child alone in a city that doesn't see you. And I run a shop that fixes things. Seems straightforward to me. Young Min looked down at his Fanta. Your father, Kofi said carefully. You want to try to reach him? A long pause. The kind that told you the question had been lived with for a long time and hadn't gotten more comfortable with age. I tried, Young Min said. The number doesn't work anymore. His contact here says he doesn't know where he is. I think he stopped. Started again. I think my father is in trouble. In Korea? The kind of trouble you don't announce. Kofi nodded slowly. He didn't press. If he contacts you, or if you find a way to reach him, we can figure out the next step together. But until then, you're here. And here is okay. Understand? Young Min understood. He understood in the way that people who have been adrift understand the sensation of something solid beneath their feet. Not immediately trusting it. Not immediately safe. But real. Present. Not moving. Okay, he said. That was the beginning of the arrangement. And for the next 2 years, it held. There is something specific that happens when a child is given a craft. Not a task. A craft. Something with depth and history and the possibility of mastery that recedes as you approach it, always showing you more of itself the closer you get. Something that rewards patience and punishes rushing and has no shortcuts, and this, paradoxically, makes it trustworthy. Because a thing that cannot lie to you is a rare thing. Young men took to repair work the way certain people take to languages. Quickly, instinctively, like the grammar of it was already inside him and he was just being reminded. Within 3 months, he could diagnose a clock's fault by sound alone. The specific hesitation, the skip, the grinding silence that meant something was wearing wrong. Within 6 months, he was doing basic restoration work on his own. Within a year, Kofi had started bringing him in on the complicated cases, the ones that other shops turned away, and showing him the thinking behind the work, not just the technique, but the philosophy. Understand what it was before you decide what it needs to become. Don't fix it into something it was never supposed to be. Zoe, for her part, treated young men with the casual proprietary affection of someone who has found a stray and considers it theirs now. She talked at him constantly. She narrated her days, her opinions, her discoveries, her grievances with the school system, her analysis of her classmates' social dynamics, her grandmother's stories, her father's weird, fascinating broken objects. She gave him a running commentary on her interior life the way some people give it to a diary, with complete honesty and no particular expectation of response. Young men, over time, began to respond. Not with the same volume. He never matched her energy. He was quiet in the deep way of people who have learned that words cost something, and so they spend them deliberately. But he listened with an intensity that Zoe felt even when she couldn't see his face. And when he said something, it landed precisely, no wasted syllables, aimed with the care of someone who knew how to calibrate. "You talk like your brain is scared of silence," he told her once, when she was 8 and he was 12, and they were sitting in the workshop while her father was out and the clocks on the shelves were all ticking in their various rhythms, creating a layered sound that was almost music. "I'm not scared of silence," Zoe said, indignant. "You run at it, like you're trying to catch it before it notices you." She opened her mouth to argue, closed it, looked at him. "That's weird to say. It's true. How do you know?" "Because I spent 2 years trying to disappear into silence," he said, with the flat matter-of-factness of someone reporting weather. "And I recognize people who can't do it. It's not a flaw. Silence scared me too when I had nothing to put in it." Zoe thought about this for a long time. Then she said, "What do you put in it now?" He looked around the workshop. At the clocks. At the half-fixed music box on the workbench. The one her father had been struggling with for weeks. The one with the broken comb that played only 2 notes of its original song, but played those 2 notes perfectly. "Work," he said. "And this?" "This meaning what?" "This," he said, gesturing vaguely at her, at the shop, at the compound beyond the window where Mame Alma's radio was playing High Life, and the evening smelled like kerosene and gardenias and grilling plantain. Zoe felt something warm move through her chest that she was too young to name. She filed it away. Mame Alma watched them with the experienced eyes of a woman who had been watching children grow up for 40 years and knew the specific tenderness of the thing she was watching. She said nothing about it. She fed them both. She told them stories at night, sometimes, when the heat made everyone slow and soft, sitting on the back step with the mango tree dark above them. African stories, Korean stories she'd made Zoe look up from library books. Stories about people who built things out of materials the world considered worthless and ended up with the only things that lasted. Young men listened to her stories with the focused stillness of someone storing them, like he was filling a space that had been empty for a long time. "Mame Alma," he asked one evening, "why do you tell Korean stories sometimes?" She looked at him with calm eyes. "Because I have a Korean boy in my house, and it's important he knows that his culture has beauty in it. That the things that make him different are not deficits." She paused. "Some people will try to make you feel like a problem that needs solving. You are not a problem. You are a complete thing that the world hasn't learned to read yet. It'll catch up." Young Min was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough in a way he was trying to control. "My father used to say something like that. About being Korean in the wrong place. He said we carry our country on our backs whether we want to or not. He meant it like a burden." "What do you think he meant?" "I think he meant it like a burden." Mame Alma looked at the sky, that particular across sky that close to midnight where the stars came in low. "And what do you think it is?" Young Min looked at his hands. Both hands now, the scars visible but old, settled into the skin. I don't know yet. Something I'm still figuring out how to carry. Good, she said. That means you're still holding it. Some people put it down and spend the rest of their lives trying to remember what it felt like. Don't put it down. Just find a better way to carry it. The music box was a small mahogany thing with mother-of-pearl inlay around the lid and a comb mechanism inside that had been missing 4 teeth for longer than anyone could trace. It played a song called Osabarima in the original, a traditional Ashani highlife tune, but in its broken state it played only a fragment, 2 rising notes and a silence, 2 rising notes and a silence, over and over like a question it couldn't finish asking. Kofi had had it for 3 years. The owner, an elderly woman named Auntie Efua whose late husband had bought it for her in the 1970s, brought it in every few months to ask if any progress had been made. Kofi always said, "Still working on it, Auntie." He had sourced 3 different sets of replacement combs from suppliers in Kumasi, Lagos, and once from a shop in London, and none of them were quite right. Young Min found the problem on a Tuesday in his 2nd year. He was cleaning the shelves, not trying to fix anything, just dusting, when he opened the music box out of habit and looked at the mechanism closely and saw what had been making the full repair impossible. The comb that was missing teeth wasn't just missing the teeth. The spine of the comb itself was slightly warped from years of humidity, and every replacement comb they'd tried had been perfectly made but wrong for this box's specific imperfection. The box had adapted to its own damage. It needed a comb that matched not what it had been designed for, but what it had become. He stood there for a long time, thinking. Then he went to Kofi's tools, and he did something Kofi had never done. He bent the replacement comb. Slightly, following the curve of the warped spine. Working slowly, heating and cooling the metal in precise increments. A process that took 4 days of careful iteration. On a Saturday morning, with Zoe doing homework at the workshop table and Mame Alma in the kitchen and Kofi standing in the doorway in silence, young Min wound the music box and set the lid. Osabarima played. Not perfectly. Not the way it had in 1975 when it was new. But completely. All the notes. All of them. The full song moving through the air of the workshop like it had been waiting for years, and it simply needed someone patient enough to listen to what the damage was asking for before deciding what whole meant. Kofi sat down on his stool. He was silent for a while. "You understood it," he said. "You always said," young Min replied, "understand what it was before you decide what it needs to become." "I say many things." Kofi smiled. "You actually listened." Zoe was looking at young Min with an expression she hadn't worn before. Something older than her 10 years, something she couldn't have explained, something about a person who fixes things with the shape of the damage rather than against it. About patience as a form of genius. "That was beautiful," she said. Young Min looked at her, then away, but not before Mame Alma, watching from the kitchen doorway, caught what was in his eyes when he looked at the little girl who had first pressed a bandage to his hand in the rain. She said nothing, just went back to her cooking, but she thought, some things grow quietly, like the things with the deepest roots. Young Min was 13, and Zoe was 9, and the world had been good for 2 years, which meant, according to the particular rhythm of their lives, that something was coming. It came in March. Kofi Mensah, who had never been sick in his life with anything more serious than malaria, collapsed in the workshop on a Wednesday afternoon. Zoe found him. The ambulance took 40 minutes. By the time they reached the hospital, the stroke had done its quiet, terrible work. He survived, but he was different after. Slower on the left side. The words that had always come to him with precision now arriving with a slight delay, like they were traveling a longer route. He could no longer do the fine work, the delicate micro-adjustments that had made his reputation. He could diagnose. He could teach. But the hands that had fixed hundreds of clocks and dozens of music boxes could no longer hold the tools the way they needed to be held. The shop still ran. Young Min, who was only 13, ran it more than anyone said out loud. He managed the orders, the customers, the supplies. Mame Alma handled the money. They kept it quiet from most people, the full weight of what had shifted, because Kofi still came in every day and sat on his stool and pointed and explained, and the customers who'd been coming for years still trusted the Mensah name. But the money got tighter. The jobs young men could do alone weren't the jobs that paid the most. The big restoration contracts, the antique clock commissions from wealthy clients. Those required the mastery that Kofi's damaged hands could no longer provide and young men hadn't yet fully acquired. Zoe, 9 years old, handled it with a practicality that was entirely her grandmother's. She stopped asking for things. She started doing more. She took over more of the shopkeeping, the sorting, the record-keeping that she wasn't quite old enough for, but did anyway because it needed doing. Young men watched her and felt something harden in his chest. Not coldly, more like the way metal hardens when it's been through fire, becoming something stronger than it was, but the process is not comfortable. He started working longer hours, earlier mornings, later nights. He started taking small repair jobs he'd never taken before, phones, radios, small electronics, things outside his training, because they paid and the family needed them to. He taught himself from videos at the library on his one afternoon off. He found that he could learn quickly when the stakes were real. "You don't have to carry this," Zoe told him once, coming into the workshop at 9 at night to find him still working, the single lamp making his face sharp and serious. She was standing in the doorway in her school uniform because she'd come straight from a late study group. "Neither do you," he said. "My father's family," she said, coming to sit on the stool beside him. "My responsibility. You're 9. So." She looked at him directly. This was something about Zoe even at 9, the way she could hold eye contact like she was reading something. "You were 11 when you started carrying things that weren't yours." He didn't have an answer for that. "We carry it together," she said, with the simple finality of someone who has decided and doesn't require agreement, only acknowledgement. "That's what we do." "Okay." Young men looked at the clock he'd been working on, put down the tool, looked at this 9-year-old girl who had opened a gate in the rain 2 years ago and pressed a bandage to his hand and changed the entire architecture of his life without any intention of doing so and without any idea that she had done it. "Okay," he said. The letter from Korea arrived when young Min was 14. It had been sent to the address of his father's old contact in Accra, who had moved twice since young Min had last been in contact with him and who, in a moment of unexpected decency, had tracked Kofi's shop down to deliver it. Young Min read it alone in the storeroom. Then he sat on the narrow bed that had been his for 2 years and held the paper and let the weight of it settle over him. His father was not in trouble. His father was, in fact, fine. He had remarried in Busan. He had 2 other children now. He had not sent for young Min because, the letter explained in the careful language of a man who knew he was saying something unforgivable and was trying to make it sound like something else. The situation had become complicated, and starting over had seemed like the right thing for everyone. Starting over. As if young Min were a version of something his father was upgrading from. There was money in the envelope. Enough to buy a plane ticket. If young Min wanted to come to Busan, his father would help him settle, the letter said. Find a school. It would be complicated, but it could be managed. Young Min folded the letter exactly in half, then in quarters. Then he sat there in the dark for a long time, in the compound that smelled of gardenias and machine oil, with the sounds of the family he'd been fed into through pure accident of kindness, with the clocks on the shop shelves ticking their various truths on the other side of the wall. He made a decision. May Mama found him the next morning on the back step with the folded letter in his hands and 2 cups of sabalo waiting beside him. She sat, took a cup, waited. He handed her the letter. She read it slowly, folded it back. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." She said it gently, not aggressively. "You know. You're just afraid of the answer." Young Min looked at the mango tree. It was taller than when he'd first arrived. He'd noticed that recently, the way things grew when you paid attention over a long time. "I don't want to go," he said. "But I think I should." "Why?" "Because I can't stay here forever. This isn't my family. This isn't my—" He stopped. "This isn't your what?" His voice went quiet. "This isn't mine to keep." May Mama was silent for a moment. Then she said something he did not expect. "When Zoe found you at that gate, she was the age I was when I found the man I loved. Kofi's father. He was sitting against a fence, too, waiting to disappear." She paused. "I gave him groundnut soup. He came back for 17 years until the day he died." Some things find their shape early. That doesn't mean they're premature. It means they're clear. Youngmin looked at her. She's 10. I said they find their shape early. I didn't say they happen early. May Mama picked up her sabalo. The question isn't whether you stay forever. The question is whether you go with a plan to come back. There is a difference between leaving and disappearing. Your father disappeared. I am asking which one you intend to do. Youngmin's hands tightened around the folded letter. If I go to Korea, he said slowly, I can learn more. Proper training. There are watchmaking and restoration schools in Seoul. I looked it up at the library. He paused. If I come back with real credentials and real skills, I can help rebuild the shop. Properly. I can make it what it was before Papa Kofi got sick. That's a plan, May Mama said. It would take years. Good things usually do. Zoe, he started. Zoe will be here, May Mama said simply. She's not going anywhere. And she's not the kind of person who forgets. She's the kind of person who waits for the right things. She stood, bones protesting with the particular creak of a woman who had been carrying the world for 6 decades. What you need to decide is whether you're worth waiting for. That's the only real question. Youngmin looked at the letter in his hands, then at the workshop door, then at the mango tree, which had been a scraggly thing 2 years ago and was now full and green and casting real shade. I'll be worth it, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. A vow made in a compound in Accra before dawn, with a fanta-colored sky coming up through the trees and all the clocks inside ticking toward morning. Good, said May Mama. Then go. Learn. Come back. It's that simple. It was not that simple. But the having of a direction is its own kind of anchor, and Youngmin held it. He told Zoe on a Sunday. She was 10 years old, and she took it with the same practical directness she took everything, which did not mean it didn't hurt, only that she had inherited her grandmother's philosophy that showing pain was separate from feeling it, and you chose when and to whom you showed it. When? She said. 3 weeks. I want to help Papa Kofi with the outstanding jobs before I go. Make sure the shop is running smoothly. Okay. She looked at the mango tree. Will you write? Yes. Will you actually write, or will you say you'll write, and then it becomes postcards every 6 months? I will actually write. He almost smiled. Every week if there's anything to say. There's always something to say. You're going to Seoul. There's always something to say about Seoul. She paused. Youngmin. Yes. Promise me something. He turned to look at her. She was 10 years old, standing in the compound with her arms crossed, trying to look older than she was, and succeeding the way she always succeeded at that particular effort. What? Come back, she said. Just that. Come back. Not come back for me or come back when you're done. Just come back. The purity of it, the completeness of it. 2 words that contained everything and asked for nothing except the thing itself. Youngmin felt the exact moment when something inside him shifted from unsettled to decided, the way a piece in a mechanism falls into place, quiet but absolute, and after that the thing runs differently. I promise, he said. I'll come back. He looked around the compound. The workshop, the mango tree, the kitchen where Mame Alma was making noise and the smell of cocoa porridge was drifting out, the storeroom that had been his room and his sanctuary, and the first place in 3 years he'd allowed himself to sleep without one part of his mind standing guard. He took off the thin metal bracelet he'd been wearing for the past year, one he'd made himself from workshop wire and a piece of copper tubing, wound into a simple clean band that he'd worn on his right wrist because it had become a habit. He held it out to Zoe. She looked at it, then at him. That's yours. I'll make another one, he said. This one is yours now. So you know I haven't forgotten the way here. She took it carefully, held it in her palm. It was warm from his skin. I'll keep it, she said, voice steady, eyes bright in the way of eyes that are holding something back without pretending they don't have anything to hold. I know you will. He left 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning before school, so that Zoe wouldn't miss class. The taxi came early. Kofi stood in the workshop doorway with one hand on the frame, his left side still slower than his right, and looked at Youngmin with the eyes of a man sending away the thing he'd fixed and was proudest of. Mame Alma pressed food into his bag. Too much food. He didn't tell her it was too much. He hugged them both. He shook Kofi's hand, and then, because Kofi pulled him in, He let himself be held for a moment by the man who had given him a craft and a philosophy and a stool to sit on when the world had been entirely stoolless. He got in the taxi. He did not look back. Not because he didn't want to. Because if he looked back at Zoe, standing in the compound gate with the copper bracelet on her wrist and the specific expression on her face that he had learned to read like his own reflection, he would not get in the taxi at all. He looked at the road ahead. He went. 18 years is not one thing. It is hundreds of things, thousands of mornings that are each complete and unrepeatable, layered one over the other until they become a life. Youngmin's 18 years were this. The first two in Seoul, at a restoration and horology school that accepted him on the basis of a letter of recommendation from Kofi Mensa and a practical assessment in which the examiner, a meticulous woman named Professor Kong, watched him disassemble and reassemble a pocket watch movement in 42 minutes, and said, "Who taught you?" He said, "My father figure in Ghana." She said, "Send him my regards." And that was that. He wrote to Zoe every week, as promised. Long letters at first, about Seoul's particular brand of cold, and the way the restoration school smelled of metal and mineral oil and reminded him of Kofi's workshop, about his classmates who were mostly older than him and treated him with the particular wariness of people encountering someone who clearly belonged in a place they didn't expect, about the food, which was good but different, about the way Korea felt like home and like a strange country simultaneously, which was the disorienting experience of returning to a place you'd left at 9, which had continued without you and was now a stranger wearing a familiar face. Zoe wrote back. She wrote about school, about the shop, about her father's slow recovery and the stubborn brightness of his mind even as his body argued against him, about May Mama's stories, about a girl in her class who was the most annoying person she had ever encountered and yet somehow also the funniest. She wrote about the bracelet, which she kept on her left wrist, and about the mango tree, which was now genuinely enormous. After 2 years in Seoul, Youngmin's letters mentioned a business opportunity. He'd been approached by a broker who connected skilled craftspeople with international clients. High-end restoration work, luxury items, the kind of clients who paid what the work was actually worth. He was cautious about it, but interested. It would mean travel, less regular letters. "Go," Zoe wrote back. "Don't be stupid. Go." He went. Over the next 8 years, he built something. Not through luck and not through shortcuts and not through any arrangement his father had left him. He had inherited nothing from that quarter, which had its own particular sting he'd long since metabolized into energy. He built it through work and precision and the reputation that precision builds, slowly at first, and then with the gathering momentum of someone whose skill had begun to exceed the size of the rooms he was being asked to do it in. He became known for a specific thing, not just restoring objects, but restoring them to what they had become, not what they had been designed to be. He had Kofi's philosophy and the technique of the Seoul school and a patience that people in his industry commented on the way other people comment on a physical characteristic, simply as a fact. He could work with damage in a way that didn't feel like loss. His business grew. He opened an office in Seoul, then a second in London. He acquired clients who gave him pieces that had defeated everyone else, pieces with provenance and complexity and the specific difficulty of being one of a kind. He started buying pieces himself, damaged antiques at auction, restoring them and selling them or sometimes keeping them. A collection growing in the Seoul office that reflected something about his aesthetic, things that had been broken and were now whole in a new way, carrying their history openly. He sent money to Accra every month. Not asked for, just sent. Enough to keep the shop running properly, to pay for the staff that Kofi could no longer do without, to ensure that Mame Alma never worried about the bills that her practical nature refused to mention. The money arrived in Zoe's account because she was the one who managed things now, had been since she was 15, with the formidable organizational competence of someone who'd been learning the business since before she was technically old enough to be in it. The letters became emails. The emails were shorter, more efficient, but still regular. He never missed a birthday. He knew about her university application, her acceptance, her degree in arts administration, the irony of a woman who'd grown up in a repair shop choosing to spend her career thinking about the preservation of things. He knew about the difficult year when Kofi's health declined sharply and the months that followed. He knew about the girls at university who'd frustrated her, the lecturer who'd recognized something in her thinking, the internship in Kamasi that had changed how she saw her work. She knew about his business, about the partnerships, the difficult clients, the pieces that frustrated him and the ones that sang when they were finished, about the office in London, about the quiet apartment in Seoul that he filled with clocks and instruments, and very few people. She asked him once, directly, in an email, "Are you happy?" He answered, "I'm good at what I do. I'm proud of it. I'm coming back when the time is right, and that's what I'm working toward. Ask me again when I get there." She answered, "That's not an answer." He answered, "I know. I'm working on the answer too." She didn't push. She was 23 by then and had learned, through years of corresponding with this particular person, that the things he said carefully were the most important ones, and that the things he wasn't saying yet were being said in the quiet of being still present, still writing, still sending money to a shop in Accra, and knowing the name of the mango tree's newest branch. But the truth that neither of them wrote in the emails, the truth that lived between every line, was that happy was a complicated word for both of them. Zoe had built a full and genuine life, and she was not pretending otherwise. She had friends she laughed with until her sides hurt. She had work that challenged her and a city she loved, and a grandmother whose stories she was quietly transcribing into a notebook because the thought of those stories being lost was unacceptable. She had enough. She was not lonely in the hollow, permanent way. She was more like a room with good furniture that was still waiting for one specific window to be installed, and not miserable about the waiting, just aware of it the way you're aware of a silence in music that is part of the composition and not a mistake. Young men, in Seoul, in London, in the various cities his work took him through, had built the same kind of fullness with the same shape of gap in it. He had colleagues who respected him and a few who had become something closer to friends, the careful kind of friendships available to people who guard themselves, warm at the edges and somewhat held back at the center. He had his work, which he loved with the clean, uncomplicated love of someone doing the thing they were meant to do. He had the apartment in Seoul, which was genuinely beautiful in the specific way that a person with his eye for objects could make a space beautiful, every piece considered, every surface holding something that had earned its place. And he had the copper bracelet on his wrist. Every day, the one she had given back to him when she was 10 years old, and he was leaving, and the whole compound had smelled of sabalo and machine oil and the particular grief of necessary departure. He had it resoldered twice in 18 years, the copper wearing thin in one place from being touched. He wore it under his watchband. Not hidden exactly. Private. Something that belonged to the part of him that was not for professional contexts or business negotiations or the careful social surface he maintained in public. Something that belonged to the real him, the one that had been fed soup in a compound in Accra and been told, implicitly and explicitly, and in every language available to a family of generous people, that he was worth something. Some days he wore it on the outside of his watchband. Those days tended to be the ones when something had reminded him. A client with a piece from West Africa. A song. A smell that came through an open window somewhere that was close to the specific Accra smell of October rain on red dirt. On those days, the bracelet on the outside was not for anyone else. It was just him, keeping the thing visible for himself as a reminder of what was real and what was worth working toward. He was 32 when he came back to Accra. He looked at his apartment in Seoul one last time before handing in the keys, at the collection of restored objects on the shelves, at the workspace where he'd done some of the best work of his life. He felt the rightness of what he'd built there, and also the complete rightness of leaving it. Some seasons ended. That was not failure. That was growth completing its shape. He got on the plane with his tools and his materials and the two things he'd been carrying for 18 years, his craft and his promise. He arrived on a Wednesday evening when the sky over Accra was the specific purple gold he'd been seeing in his mind all this time, whenever the emails said things like the mango tree is going to have to be managed soon. It's taking over the back wall. He went to the workshop first, not to the family compound. He needed to establish himself, to have something to show before he showed up. He had rented the space 3 months earlier, sight unseen, through an agent, and it had been set up by the time he arrived, and it was right. The proportions were right. The light was right. The smell, after he'd worked in it for 2 days, was exactly right. He did not contact Zoe. He called Mame Alma, who had been expecting the call, and who said only, "I know. I'm not telling her. When you're ready." And then, "The bracelet is in the estate inventory. Your timing is good." And then, "Don't wait too long." He had waited 6 months. Not for himself, but because Kofi had asked him to let it happen the right way, the auction way, the way with a door opening from the right direction. He had honored this. It had been the hardest 6 months of his life, being in the same city, knowing she was there, her consulting office 3 streets from his workshop, probably walking past the end of his road sometimes. He'd been careful not to cross the wrong path prematurely. And then the Thursday of the auction had come, and she'd said his name with 2 syllables that contained 21 years. And everything else was what it was now, real and present and not leaving. Kofi Mensah died on a Friday in April, 7 years after the stroke, in the hospital bed with Zoe on one side and Mame Alma on the other. He had been declining for a year in the slow, dignified way of a man who had made his peace with most things and was mainly waiting for his body to catch up to his acceptance. He had asked Zoe to bring the music box to the hospital in the final weeks. The mahogany one with the mother-of-pearl inlay. The one young man had fixed. He had it on the bedside table. He wound it sometimes in the evenings, and the song played through the antiseptic hospital air and made the nurses stop in the doorway for a moment with something on their faces that wasn't professional. "Tell young men," Kofi said to Zoe, 2 days before the end, in the careful reconstructed speech that had been his since the stroke, but that carried all his characteristic precision in a different form. "Tell him the shop is his to come home to. I built it for anyone with patience enough to keep doing the work. He qualifies." "I'll tell him," Zoe said. "And tell him thank you. For the music box. For what it became." He looked at the small mahogany box on the table. He understood. Not everyone does. Some people spend their whole lives fixing things back to what they were before. He understood that the before isn't always the point. The after is the point. Zoe held her father's hand and thought, "I have been learning this lesson my whole life from every direction, and I still don't know if I've gotten it right." "You've gotten it right," her father said, which meant she had said the thought out loud without realizing. "Don't second-guess yourself, Zoe. You were born understanding things that other people have to learn. Use it." She told young men that night in an email. All of it. He responded at dawn, Seoul time, which meant he had not slept. The email was 3 sentences. "Tell him I know. Tell him I'm coming home when the time is right. Tell him I kept the lesson." Kofi died the following Friday. The music box played Osabarima at the funeral from the workshop step where they said it, and every person in attendance was quiet in a way that meant something. The estate notice came from the legal firm 3 months after the funeral. Kofi had been meticulous about his will, another characteristic of the man. The careful accounting of things and the distribution of his belongings had been organized with the precision of someone who had spent his life knowing the value of things that other people underestimated. Zoe had known for years that some of the pieces in the shop were being held in trust, valuable items her father had accepted as payment or found at estate sales and kept against the future, pieces he'd restored and documented and kept off the shelf. The legal firm administered the trust, and, in accordance with her father's specific instruction, the pieces were to be auctioned publicly, with the proceeds going to the shop's operational fund and the rest to Zoe. The music box was not on the auction list. It was hers directly, by explicit naming in the will. The mahogany music box with mother-of-pearl inlay, to my daughter Zoe, because she was there when it first played properly, and that matters. She read this in the lawyer's office with dry eyes and a full chest, and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "Thank you to the lawyer, who had not been responsible for it, but who received the thanks graciously." The auction was on a Thursday morning in June, in a converted hall near the city center, professionally organized, drawing the kind of collectors' crowd that had been aware of Kofi Mensah's shop for decades, some of them the very clients he'd served, coming now to acquire in the formal way what they'd admired informally for years. Zoe attended because she had to, as executor, but also because she wanted to see her father's things received properly. She wanted to watch people understand what they were holding. She was standing near the back of the hall when the mahogany music box was carried in. Not for auction, she'd been clear about that. It was being displayed as part of a provenance presentation, a brief history of the shop and its most notable restorations, which Zoe had written and which the auctioneer read with appropriate gravity. She had the box on a small table near the wall, the lid open, the mechanism visible. A woman was admiring it when Zoe noticed the movement near the auction entrance. The man came in without announcement. He didn't need to announce himself. He was the kind of presence that reorganized the space around him without effort, not aggressively, but with the certainty of someone who had been in many rooms and was comfortable in all of them. Dark suit, jaw clean-shaved. He moved like someone who'd learned to carry responsibility without letting it show in his posture, the control of that being its own form of discipline. He had 3 people with him. Assistants, clearly. They maintained a professional distance that said, "We work for him, but we do not shadow him." Zoe noticed him the way you notice a change in air pressure. Something shifted. She watched him scan the auction items. He moved with focus, not browsing, looking for something specific. He found the display table with the smaller items, the ones she hadn't expected to draw much serious attention, and paused at something near the end of the table. Young men saw the music box immediately on a small table near the wall, the lid open, the mechanism visible. It stopped him cold. 20 years older, water-stained, sitting under a spotlight like it had been waiting. He walked straight to the auctioneer. "That piece. I want it." The auctioneer gestured toward the bidding. He raised his paddle. Someone across the room raised theirs back. He raised higher without looking up. The other paddle matched him. He went higher again, this time glancing across the room to see who was fighting him for a broken music box nobody else cared about. A woman in burnt orange. Natural curls. Chin up. Dark eyes locked on him with the specific expression of someone who would not be moved. He raised again. She raised again. The room started murmuring. He pushed the bid so high the auctioneer's voice faltered. She pushed back. And then she stopped bidding and just looked at him. Really looked. Her gaze dropped to his raised left hand. To his knuckle. To the thin crescent scar sitting white against his skin. Her paddle fell. Her lips parted. "Young man?" Not a question. He looked at her. And 18 years folded into nothing. Not because nothing had happened in them, but because everything that had happened in them had been in service of this. This room. This moment. This look between 2 people who had been growing toward each other across 18 years of distance and work and careful tending of a space neither of them had named out loud. His voice, when it came, was rough around the edges of its control. "Zoe." The whole auction hall had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when something private becomes briefly visible in a public space and everyone has the instinct to both look and look away. Zoe's hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against her sides, her grandmother's training, and walked toward him with her chin up and her heart making significant noise behind her ribs. "You're here," she said. "You told me," he said, "to come back. I said I would." 18 years, she said. Not accusatory. More like, "This is a fact I have been living with, and I need you to know I know the number." "I know." His jaw moved. "I'm sorry it took that long. I'm not sorry I took the time. But I'm sorry for the length of it. There's a difference." He paused. "Your father. I know I didn't make it back in time. I am sorry for that most of all." Zoe's eyes went bright. "He knew you were coming. He said to tell you the shop is yours to come home to." Young Min's expression did something complicated and then settled into something she hadn't seen on his face in 18 years. Not the boy's expression. The man's version of the same thing. The look of someone receiving something they had been careful not to hope for too loudly, in case hope turned out to be the kind of sound that called the wrong things in. He picked up the copper bracelet. She recognized it the second he held it out. How had she not recognized it immediately? The specific weave of it, the weight, the way the copper had oxidized to a specific warmth that came from years of contact with someone's skin. His skin. He'd been wearing it. He'd been wearing it all these years, and left it here when When had he left it here? When had he come back before today? You came back, she said. Before today. You've been here. 6 months ago, he said quietly. I came to see your father. Before he died. He didn't tell you? She shook her head, eyes wide. He asked me not to. He said, Young Min's voice went careful. He said you needed to find your own way back to this. That he'd put the bracelet in the estate inventory, so it would be here today, so we'd find each other properly, when you were ready and I was ready. Not before. Zoe thought of her father, of his particular brand of quiet intelligence, of the man who had never rushed a repair in his life because he understood that forcing a mechanism before it was ready was how you broke it permanently. He planned this, she said, half laughing, voice unsteady. He planned this, Young Min confirmed, and something in his face released, like a piece falling into place, quiet and absolute. He held out the bracelet. Not the first one she'd given him. That had been wire, and she'd worn it until the clasp broke in her 3rd year of university. This was his, the one he'd made and given her and reclaimed somehow and kept. He was holding it out the way he'd held out a cup of sabalo to her father the very first night he'd stayed. Not forcing it. Offering. She held out her wrist. He put it on. It was warm from his hands. Around them, the auction hall was very quiet. And then someone, she thought it might have been the auctioneer, began to applaud, and then the room was filled with it. They did not immediately pick up where they'd left off. That was not who they were. They were both people who understood that the length of a gap could not simply be papered over with presents, that 18 years of separate lives had made them different, and the different had to be understood, not rushed. Young Min had an apartment in Accra now. He'd moved back 6 months ago, the same visit he hadn't told her about, because he'd known that coming back permanently before he could tell her that was what he was doing, permanently, would be wrong. He needed to establish himself here first. Needed to have something to offer that wasn't just the memory of who he'd been. He'd opened a workshop, small, unassuming, on a street near Kofi's old shop. The kind of place you had to know to find. It had already been written about twice in the kind of publications that collectors of fine antiques read carefully, because the quality of his work was the kind that moved through those communities like a current. Zoe saw it for the first time 3 days after the auction. He took her there on a Saturday morning, the way her father used to take her on Saturday mornings, and she stood in the doorway and breathed in the particular smell of machine oil and metal and careful intention, and felt something settle in her that had been restless for a very long time. You made it smell like Papa's shop, she said. No, he said. Papa's shop smelled like this. I learned the smell before I learned anything else. He paused. It's the smell of work that's trying to be worthy of the thing it's working on. I think most good workshops smell like this. She walked through slowly, the way she used to walk through her father's workshop as a child, reading each item the way you read a page, understanding its place in the ongoing story of the room. There were pieces from his collection here, items he'd restored, displayed not as trophies but as what they were, objects that had been through something and were more themselves for it. On the main workbench, in the center of everything, was the mahogany music box. Her music box, the one her father had bequeathed her. Young Min had taken it from the auction hall for her. She looked at him. You had it here. I was looking after it, he said, until you wanted it back. She went to the workbench, lifted the lid. The mechanism gleamed. He'd cleaned and oiled it. She could tell, the slight brightening of the metal, the movement of the comb perfectly balanced. She wound the key. Osabarima played. All of it. Full and complete, a little worn at the edges from decades of use and love, carrying its history in its sound the way every properly restored thing carries the evidence of what it's been through. Zoe stood there and let herself cry. Not the polite kind, not the held-together kind. The actual kind. For her father. For the years. For this room that smelled like childhood. For the man standing beside her who had kept a bracelet for 18 years and come back the way he'd said he would, and was real and present, and not a letter, not an email, not a promise thing that had learned the habit of remaining a promise. Young Min stood beside her and didn't say anything. He was good at this, at being present in silence without making the silence a demand. He handed her a cloth and waited, and she appreciated that he waited, that he understood the difference between grief that needed accompaniment and grief that needed space. When she was done, she folded the cloth and put it in her pocket. "Tell me about soul," she said. "Really, not the work. You. Tell me about 18 years. He looked at the music box. "That's a long story." "I know." She pulled up a stool. "I'm not going anywhere." And he talked. Really talked. With a kind of openness that was different from his emails, which had always been precise and communicative but had maintained a certain professional distance, as though they were dispatches from a respectful colleague rather than letters from someone who had been in love with her since before either of them had the language for it. He talked about soul, about the cold of it, and the particular loneliness of returning to a place that didn't remember you, about the school and Professor Kong and the discipline that had shaped him, about the years of building the business alone, the choices he'd made to do it through quality and patience rather than speed, which had taken longer but had made it real, about the apartment in Seoul that was good but empty, about the London office that he was closing because he was here now and had decided that here was where the work should be, about his father, who he had not seen again, who had sent Christmas cards for a few years and then hadn't, who Young Min had decided, after the kind of long deliberate reckoning that only time and distance and the work of making your own life could produce, he did not need to be angry at anymore. Not because what his father had done was acceptable. It wasn't. But because the man's failure had redirected Young Min to a compound in Accra where a woman had given him soup without conditions and a man had given him a philosophy and a 7-year-old girl had given him a bandage and made him feel visible for the first time in 2 years. "I wrote my father a letter," he said, 3 years ago. "I told him what I wanted him to know. That I was okay. That I'd made something. That I didn't need anything from him." He paused. He didn't respond. That was also fine. Some things, you say them for yourself, not for the response. Zoe nodded. "What about you?" he said. "Really? Not the emails. You." She talked. About the university years and the complicated pleasure of studying things she loved with people who often didn't understand why she loved them. About the grief years after her father's stroke, the slow recalibration of what the family was. About Mame Alma's own health declining in the last 3 years, the spryness giving way to the more careful management of a body that had been generous for a very long time. About her work now, the arts administration consultancy she'd built, helping cultural institutions manage and preserve their collections, work that was entirely her father's daughter in its orientation toward the enduring value of things that the world might overlook. About the bracelet. She told him about the bracelet. That she'd worn it every single day. That when the first one's clasp broke, she'd kept it in a small box and gone looking for a craftsperson to repair it. And the craftsperson had looked at the copper weave and said, "Whoever made this was good, better than good." And she had thought, "Yes. Yes, I know." Young Min's face was quiet when she said this. The way faces go quiet when they're holding more than they want to let out all at once. "I never stopped," he said. "I know," she said. "I need you to actually know it. Not just," he stopped. "Tried again. "I need you to know that it wasn't absence. It was timing. I needed to be something worth coming back as." "You were always worth coming back as," Zoe said. "I didn't know that then." "I did. You were 10. I was perceptive for 10. She held his gaze the way she'd always held his gaze, direct and patient and reading. "Young Min, I know you. I have always known you. The letters and emails weren't adequate, but they were also not nothing. I know the shape of how you think. I know what you're careful about, and what you're reckless about, and what you value, and what you've given up, and what you haven't been willing to give up." She paused. "You were worth it. You are worth it. And I need you to know that I'm saying this as a 28-year-old woman with a full life and clear eyes, not as a 10-year-old girl who didn't know any better. Understand?" Young Min looked at her for a long time. "Yes," he said. "Good." She stood. "Now show me how you've organized your tool drawer, because if it's anything like Papa's, you've done it wrong, and I'm going to have opinions." He laughed. An actual, full laugh, the kind that changes the temperature of a room. She'd heard it in his letters sometimes, between the lines, but not like this. Not free and present and real. She decided that sound was one of the better things she'd ever worked for. Mame Alma was 79 years old and moved slower than she used to, but saw faster than ever, which she considered a fair trait. She had known about Youngmin's return for 6 months. Kofi had told her the plan from his hospital bed, the careful arrangement of the bracelet in the estate inventory, the auction, the particular kind of returning that required the right door to open from the right direction. She had thought, this is exactly like Kofi. She had also thought, this is exactly right. When Zoe brought Youngmin to visit the following week, Mame Alma was sitting on the back step in the afternoon shade. The mango tree above her was enormous now, its canopy spread wide and generous over the whole back of the compound. She looked at Youngmin as he came through the gate, and her face did something that was both greeting and assessment simultaneously. "You took your time," she said. "I was told I had it," he said. "By whom?" "You." A pause. "You said the question was whether I was worth waiting for." Mame Alma's eyes moved between them. Zoe, standing slightly behind Youngmin, was clearly trying to look like she was not having strong feelings, which meant she was having all of them. Youngmin was standing with a stillness that was different from the stillness of the 11-year-old boy at the gate. That stillness had been survival. This one was peace. "Sit down," she said, pointing. "Both of you." They sat on the steps on either side of her, the three of them looking at the mango tree, the way they had sat when Zoe was 9 and Youngmin was 13, and Mame Alma told them stories about things built from materials the world considered worthless. "Your grandfather," Mame Alma said to Zoe, "when he came back from working in Lagos for 3 years. I was 21. He arrived in the evening. He stood at the gate." "You've told me this," Zoe said softly. "I'm telling it again." Mame Alma was firm in the way of a woman who has earned the right to repeat the things that matter. "He stood at the gate, and he said, I kept my word. I said 3 years, and it was 3 years. I said I would come back with something to offer, and I did. Now I am asking if what I built is enough." And I looked at him. She paused, and I thought, when did enough become the bar? He wasn't asking if he was enough. He was asking if he'd done enough to deserve what I already knew we were. She looked at Youngmin. "There's a difference." Youngmin was very still. "Don't ask if you're enough," Mame Alma said. "You've always been enough. That was settled on the first night in this kitchen. What happened in between was just you learning to believe it." She stood with the deliberate care of someone respecting what their body needed now, collected her empty cup, and went inside. Through the kitchen window a moment later came the sound of the radio, the high life station she'd listened to for 40 years, a song that was old enough to have been playing the night Youngmin first sat at this table. Zoe and Youngmin sat on the step in the afternoon shade of the mango tree. "Your grandmother," Youngmin said. "Yes. She's been waiting to say that. She's been waiting 18 years to say that," Zoe confirmed. "Worth the wait?" "For her, definitely." Zoe bumped his shoulder with hers. Light and easy. The specific casual intimacy of two people who have been in each other's orbit long enough that proximity is no longer uncertain. "For me, also yes." Youngmin looked at her, at the copper bracelet on her wrist, at the compound around them, which was both deeply familiar and entirely new, the way all real homecomings are. The place unchanged, but the seeing of it transformed by everything you've become since you last stood here. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I want you to know that. This time, I'm not going anywhere." "I know," she said. "You came back. That's what people who aren't going anywhere do first." The months that followed were not a fairy tale. They were work. Real work. The kind that has friction and negotiation and the specific difficulty of two people who have been independent and self-sufficient and privately armored for a long time learning, in real time, how to be known. Youngmin's workshop grew. He took on 2 apprentices, young men from the neighborhood who had the patience and the fine motor precision the work required, and he taught them with the same approach Kofi had taught him. Understand what it was before you decide what it needs to become. He was a demanding teacher, also a fair one. His apprentices stayed. Zoe's consultancy expanded. She'd been working primarily with small institutions, community galleries, local museums, the kind of places that had important collections and not enough resources to care for them properly. Youngmin's skills and her network began to overlap in ways that were professionally useful. She could recommend him for restoration work that came through her clients. He could advise her on the material value of pieces her clients were trying to assess. They worked well together. They had always worked well together, even across the distance. but in person it was more visible, the way their thinking complemented rather than duplicated. She was strategic, pattern-oriented, good at the long view. He was precise, technical, good at the close thing. Together they covered the distances each left alone. They also argued. Seriously and specifically, the way people argue when they're not performing the argument, but having it. About the workshop's expansion plans, which Zoe thought were too conservative and young men thought were appropriately measured. About the best way to handle a difficult client of hers who kept undervaluing the work. About whether the mango tree needed pruning, which was a smaller argument but had the same structure as the bigger ones. Two people with clear views, neither of whom was entirely right, working towards something both of them wanted. Mame Alma watched the arguments with visible satisfaction, which she expressed by not intervening. "You're not going to help?" Zoe asked her once, after a particularly energetic disagreement about the workshop's pricing structure. "You don't need help," Mame Alma said. "You need to have the argument properly. Some things get clearer when you say them out loud." She looked at Zoe over the rim of her tea. "Is he wrong?" "Partially." "And are you?" "Also partially." "Then you both need the argument to figure out which parts." She returned to her tea. That's what arguments are for between people who are trying to build something together. It's not conflict. It's calibration. Zoe took this information back to the workshop and delivered a revised version of her position to young men, who received it, considered it, revised his own, and they came to a conclusion neither of them had arrived at before the argument, and that worked better than either of their original positions. "Your grandmother," he said afterward. "I know," she said. "She teaches by withdrawing. She's been doing it my whole life. It was extremely frustrating as a child, and is now very useful as an adult." Kofi did it differently, young men said thoughtfully. "He taught by describing. He'd tell you about the work and then let you do it and see what you did with what he'd told you." He paused. "I miss him." "I know." Zoe sat down on the workshop stool. "He loved you. I want you to know that fully, not just as a concept. He loved you like you were his. He used to say that the things that found their way to him were sent specifically. That the broken clock didn't end up in his shop by accident." Young Min was quiet for a moment, adjusting a piece on the workbench with unnecessary care. The kind of care that meant he was feeling something and using the work as a container for it. "I know," he said. "I knew it while he was alive. I think I was afraid to receive it fully because I'd had people leave before, and receiving it fully meant there was more to lose. And now?" He put down the tool, turned to face her. "And now I've decided that not receiving things fully because they might be taken is the same as not having them at all. And I'd rather have them and lose them than protect myself from having them." He looked at her steadily. "That applies to everything I'm building here. All of it. I'm not keeping anything at arm's length anymore." Zoe held his gaze. "Good," she said. "Neither am I." Young men proposed in the workshop. Not because the workshop was the most romantic setting, though in their particular context it was arguably the most honest one. He proposed in the workshop because that was where the music box was, and the music box was the fulcrum point of everything. The thing her father had fixed and young men had understood and Kofi had given Zoe, because she'd been there when it first played properly, and that matters. He had taken the music box apart 3 days earlier, and Zoe had come in to find him working on the mechanism with the focused expression she recognized from childhood, the one that meant he was listening to the object rather than talking at it. "What are you doing?" "Adding a note," he said. She watched him work. The particular precision of his hands now, trained to a fineness that Kofi had seen coming before it arrived, making adjustments to the comb mechanism with tools so small they were barely visible. "Which note?" "The one the original song was missing," he said. "Not because of damage. Because the original craftsman didn't include it. I've been listening to the song for 20 years, and there's always been a note that should have been there." She stood at the workbench beside him. "How do you know it should be there?" "Because I know what the song is saying," he said. "And it's not quite saying it completely." When he was done, he wound the box and set the lid, and the song played. Osabarima, all the familiar notes, the two-note rising call she'd heard since childhood, the full melody young men had restored years ago. And then, at the end, a new note. Small, precise, fitting into the music the way a key fits a lock you didn't realize was locked until the moment it opened. The song was complete. Zoe stood very still. What does the note say? She asked quietly. Young Min put the music box down, turned to face her. He had the copper bracelet in his hand, the original, the one she'd been wearing, which she had not noticed him remove. It says, he said, that some things that were good before can be better. That what something was is not the limit of what it can become. He looked at the bracelet. It says that I've been yours since an October night in this compound, and you've been mine since the same night, and I've been taking the long way around to saying so, because I needed to be sure I was saying it from a place of fullness rather than need. He looked up, and I am now. Full. Here. Asking. He held out the bracelet. It was different. He'd added a small loop, and threaded through the loop was a ring. Not a large ring. Not a showy one. A narrow band of copper and silver wound together, the two metals distinct and visible, not merged into something uniform, but twined into something that was stronger for the combination. You made this, she said. Who else would? Young Min. Her voice was doing the thing it did when she was holding more than one feeling at once. You made me a ring. I've been making things for you since I was 11 years old. He paused. The first bracelet was terrible. I've improved. She laughed. The full, genuine laugh that was one of the sounds he'd been building toward without knowing it was the destination. Yes, she said. I haven't asked yet. Yes, she said again. To whatever you're about to ask, yes. Zoe Mensah. He said her full name with all the weight of everything it meant to him. All the soup kitchens and Sabalo evenings and letters and emails and 18 years of working toward this. Will you let me stay? Not. Will you marry me? Will you let me stay? Because that was the thing, the real question, the one that had been the question since he was 11 and crouching against a wall in the rain. The question of whether there was room, whether he belonged, whether this was his. You've always belonged here, she said. I've been waiting for you to know it. He put the ring on her finger. She put the bracelet back on his wrist, where it lived. The music box played. The wedding was small, the kind of small that was chosen rather than settling. Compound, family, close people, the specific warmth of an event that had not been designed to impress anyone, but rather to gather the people who mattered in a space that mattered and let something true be witnessed. Mame Amma sat in the best chair, which had been carried out to the compound specifically. She was dressed in the specific green and gold that she wore for occasions of significance, and she looked at the compound full of people and at the mango tree that her husband had planted as a young man and that had outlived him, and several other things, and at Zoe in the dress they'd argued about for 3 weeks before agreeing on, simple and Ghanaian and deeply her, and at young Min standing with the particular stillness of a man who has found the exact place he is supposed to be and is not moving from it. She told a story at the reception. This was not requested. She simply began speaking, and the compound went quiet because when Mame Alma told a story, you listened. She told the story of a man who repaired things, who had a philosophy, understand what it was before you decide what it needs to become, who had understood, she said, that this philosophy did not apply only to clocks and music boxes, that the best repair was not the one that erased the evidence of damage, but the one that incorporated it, that made the history of the thing part of its beauty rather than its shame. My son-in-law, she said, meaning Kofi, spent his life proving this. Every broken thing that came through that gate left better than it arrived, not because he pretended it was new, but because he understood that old and repaired was a different kind of value than new, more honest, more specific, more itself. She looked at young men, and I had the privilege of watching him teach this lesson to someone who had already been living it. A boy who had learned early that being broken didn't mean being unworthy, who had learned that patience wasn't weakness, who had learned that the right way to come back was thoroughly prepared to stay. She looked at Zoe, and I had the privilege of watching this child of mine, who opened a gate in the rain when she was 7 years old and had been opening gates her whole life, because she is the kind of person who cannot pass a wall without wondering who might need the other side of it. Mame Alma's voice was still steady, though her eyes were bright. She waited for the right return. Not the first one, the right one. She knew the difference. She picked up her cup. What I want for both of you is this. Continue to repair things. Not just the clocks, not just the objects. Repair each other on the days that need it. Repair the world when you can reach it. And never mistake newness for value. Some of the most precious things in existence have been through everything and are still here. That's not a flaw. That's the whole point. She drank. The compound erupted in the kind of noise that only happens when something true has been said to a room full of people who recognize it. Youngmin caught Zoe's eye across the compound. She was laughing and crying simultaneously, which was, he had come to understand, simply what Zoe did when she was completely happy. She felt it in every direction at once, and her face couldn't pick one. He had learned her face over 21 years. He knew every version of it. He thought he would spend the rest of his life learning new ones. 3 years later, young Min was in the workshop on a Thursday afternoon when Zoe came to the doorway with an expression he'd learned to read like a change in barometric pressure. Something interesting had happened. The specific brightness in her eyes that meant the world had done something that confirmed a thing she already believed. "Come outside," she said. He set down his tools and followed her through the workshop and out to the compound. The mango tree was in its late afternoon shade, the gold light coming through the leaves in the particular way it did in October, the month of rain. Near the compound gate, a boy was standing on the outside. 10 or 11, maybe. It was hard to tell because he was slight in the way of someone who had been rationing themselves. Clothes that were adequate but not quite right for the season. Standing very still the way certain children learn to stand when they've discovered that staying still was safer than moving. He was looking at the workshop with the careful look of someone deciding whether to hope. Zoe went to the gate, not moving fast, not with the efficiency of purpose that was her default, but with the particular gentleness she used for specific situations. She opened the gate, crouched to his height. "Are you okay?" she asked. The boy looked at her. A careful look. Calculating. The way that children who have had to be careful calculate. "I saw the light," he said. His English was accented, and she thought she heard something in it, possibly Francophone, possibly Cameroonian or Togolese, the specific blend of French and English that came from borders. "I saw the light from the workshop. I just wanted to see." "You wanted to see the clocks?" He didn't answer, but something in his face said, "Not just the clocks." "Are you hungry?" Zoe asked. The boy looked down at the ground, then back up. "A little." "Come in," she said. "My grandmother makes groundnut soup. There's always more." The boy hesitated for a long moment. The specific hesitation of someone deciding whether the world was offering what it appeared to be offering or something more complicated. Young Min was standing in the compound behind Zoe. He watched the boy's face do the calculation he had done himself, many years ago, and in this exact compound, standing in a rain that had felt like it might never stop. He watched the moment the calculation resolved. The boy stepped through the gate. Zoe brought him to the kitchen. May Mama, 82 years old and seeing clearly as ever, looked at the boy from her kitchen chair, assessed, and pointed at the table. "Sit." To Zoe, "Soup is ready." Youngmin stood in the workshop doorway and watched. After dinner, while the boy was eating a second bowl and Zoe was sitting across from him asking careful questions in the way she'd always asked questions, giving them space to breathe so the answers could come from somewhere honest, young Min went to his workbench. He opened the small drawer where he kept raw materials. Wire, metal, small pieces of copper. He worked for an hour while the sounds of the kitchen carried through the compound. May Mama's radio. Zoe's voice. The boy's voice, which had grown slightly, just slightly, less careful. When he was done, he had a small copper bracelet. Simple, clean, made from workshop materials, which was what he'd always had. He took it to the kitchen. The boy looked up at him with the wary attention of someone who'd learned that good things were sometimes attached to terms. Young Min sat down at the table. He held out the bracelet. "What is it?" the boy asked. "It's so you remember," young Min said, "that you came in from the cold and someone fed you, and that was real. That it happened." He paused. "And that you can come back. This is a place you can come back to." The boy looked at the bracelet, at young Min, at Zoe, who was watching both of them with the expression she wore when the world was doing something she already believed it capable of. The boy took the bracelet, put it on his thin wrist, looked at it. "Thank you," he said. "You don't have to keep thanking us," Zoe said, her voice warm and certain. "Just eat, and come back." Youngmin looked across the table at Zoe. She looked back. Between them, without needing to be said, this is what it was always for. Not the shop, not the money or the skill or the credentials or the 18 years of building. Not even the love story, though the love story was real and good and worth every year it had taken. All of it had been in service of this. The open gate, the warm kitchen, the child who needed to know that someone could see him. The bracelet changed hands. The cycle continued. And in the workshop next door, the music box played its complete song in the late afternoon light. Every note, full and certain and carrying 20 years of history in a melody that had been broken and was now whole. The way whole was possible when someone understood that the damage was part of the story and the story was the point. Osabarima, rising and full, the kind of song that stays. Mame Amma told Zoe something on the last morning of her long and excellent life. She was in her room. The morning light was the soft orange of early Accra, the kind that made everything look like it was lit from inside. Young Min was in the kitchen making tea because that was the thing he did when he didn't know what else to do and it needed doing. Zoe was beside the bed holding her grandmother's hand, the hand that had pressed food into hundreds of palms, that had braided her hair, that had cupped her face with infinite gentleness on the night she'd cried about a hungry boy behind a fence. "I saw you that night," May Mama said. Her voice was small now, but her eyes were clear. "When you went out in the rain to get your notebook." "I was watching." Zoe stared at her. "You were watching?" From the kitchen window, a slight curve of her lips. "I saw you find him. I saw you press the bandage to his hand. I saw him come through the gate. And you didn't stop me?" "Why would I stop you?" May Mama's eyes were steady. "You were doing the thing I'd been teaching you your whole life. You saw someone trying to disappear, and you wouldn't let them." She paused. "The only thing I had to add was the soup." Zoe was quiet for a long moment. "What if he'd been dangerous?" she asked. "I would have been at the door in 30 seconds. The curve of the lips again, small and definite. "I was watching, baby. I was always watching. The lesson wasn't about leaving you alone. It was about letting you discover that your instincts were right. You can only learn that by using them." Zoe held her hand tighter. "You did good," May Mama said. "Both of you. Your father knew it. I know it." She glanced toward the kitchen, where the sound of young Min's careful movement was quiet and familiar. "He knows it, too, now. That took longer, but he got there." She looked back at Zoe. "The boy at the gate last week. He came back," Zoe said. "He's been coming every Thursday." "Good." May Mama closed her eyes for a moment. "Open them. You know what the real miracle is? Not that young Min kept the bracelet for 18 years. Not that your father arranged the auction. Not even that a 7-year-old girl opened a gate in the rain." She was quiet for a moment. "The miracle is the ordinary part. The soup being on the stove. The radio playing. The gate not being locked." She squeezed Zoe's hand once, gently, decisively. "Most miracles are just someone leaving the gate unlocked." She slept after that. She slept through the afternoon and into the evening, with the sound of a cry outside and the music box on the dresser, which young Min had brought in and wound in the morning, and the High Life radio station playing low, and Zoe on one side and young Min on the other. She did not wake up, but her face, at the end, looked like someone who had finished the last item on a list they'd been working on for a very long time, and found it complete. The Thursday boy's name was Adama. He was 11. He was from Togo, the specific geography of family trouble that the authorities were working through. He had patience and good hands and no interest in sitting still for long. Young Min gave him a clock to take apart on his third visit. A simple mantel clock, not valuable, not complicated, but requiring the specific attention to small things that either frustrated a person or revealed them. Adama took it apart in 20 minutes, put it back together in 30, with no pieces left over. He looked up at young Min with eyes that were doing the calculation, the same calculation young Min had run his whole young life, the one that asked, "Is this real? Can I trust it? Will it last? Can I come back next week?" Adama asked. "You can come back every week," young Min said. "I'll have the next one waiting." Adama looked at the copper bracelet on his wrist, looked at the workshop around him, smelling of machine oil and careful intention, the clocks ticking on their shelves in their various rhythms, making a sound like many different kinds of time, all running honestly. He picked up his bag. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday, Young Min confirmed. Adama went out through the gate. Young Min stood at the workshop door and watched him go, and across the compound. Zoe was looking at him from the kitchen doorway with the expression she wore when the world was being exactly what she believed it was, and he looked back at her with the expression that was still learning how to show what it felt, but was getting better at it every year. The gate stood open behind them both. It was always standing open. That was the point. That had always been the point. The end. Thank you for staying until the end, besties. Zoe and Young Min's story is for everyone who has ever held on to something across a long distance. Not because you had to, but because you chose to. It's for everyone who was fed by someone who didn't know them. For every child who needed a gate to be unlocked and found one. And for everyone who left and kept their promise and came home. If this story moved something in you, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. Tell us, what did you carry for a long time that turned out to be worth carrying? We read every single one. And also let us know in the comment section where you're watching from. See you in the next story.